In this lesson, I'm going to talk about our earliest human history. I just want to remind you that the mission statement for Common Knowledge Trust is for you, your family, your neighbors, your community, your district, your state, your country, to use any and all health and wellness as suits without prejudice. I want us to step back for a moment and think about our humanity. Any man can impregnate any woman who's fertile. Any child can be brought up in any culture, with any language, with any religion, community identity. Whether you are a creationist or believe in evolution, how many cultures do you believe existed worldwide? And how can we be one humanity with such variety? It's like taking all the fish in the sea and saying all of them can have babies together, and there's no species differentiation. We have no species differentiation within our humanity, and that's phenomenal to ponder, particularly on this topic of pregnancy and childbirth, because every pregnant woman around the world and throughout the time that humans have existed here will give birth one way or another. Birth happens. If you do nothing, birth is still going to happen. Do you care about that? And if you care, what can anyone do about it? What might be the do's and don'ts in your mind or in your family, neighborhood, culture, religion? What are the foods that you can or shouldn't eat? What about the activities or having intimacy? Is massage included? Are ceremonies included? What about assessments, monitoring, and procedures? And now I want you to think about what it's like living without all your modern conveniences. I've been in 30 remote cultures, so I understand more about what it means to not have things. Sure, you might garden, but are you entirely food self-sufficient for yourself, for your family, your neighborhood, or a village of 200 to 2,000 or bigger? And able to do that year after year, generation after generation, century after century? What about your clothing, all the things you need in your house, your drinking water, containers, health systems, and health around pregnancy, childbirth, and newborns? There are still thousands of cultures around the world doing this, but less and less. Every community that I have been in since the 70s uses matches. Very few people are making fires without matches. They almost all have tin roofs. They wear secondhand clothes. They have Coleman lanterns everywhere and aluminum pots. But on a day-to-day basis, they have just what they can do for themselves, including health and wellness, pregnancy and birth. In reality, we can't talk about traditional healthcare, modern medicine, and natural health as though they are just three choices. We can talk about these systems generally about life, health, illness, and accident, but how do these systems work around pregnancy, birth, and the newborn? How much information do you have about all of these tens and thousands of cultures and how they deal with pregnancy and birth in their culture? And in case you have any illusion of any of these three global health systems, they have all done and still do cringeworthy things, both around general health and pregnancy, childbirth, and the newborn. Now let me talk about traditional health care. It's varied beyond belief, often just village to village. But would you consider village healthcare primitive? Do you know anything about any village traditional health system, general or childbirth? Write this stuff down. Is what you know one of those cringeworthy things, or wow, why isn't this everywhere? Are you familiar with the bigger systems like Tibetan medicine, Chinese traditional medicine, Mayan, Aztec, Ayurveda, Greek, Roman, just to name a few? Are these big systems still traditional healthcare? They're certainly sophisticated, and they certainly hold everything that is cringeworthy and everything that should be everywhere. Do you use any of these health systems in your general health or around childbirth? Do you find that you blend systems with each other and or with modern medicine? Does traditional health include black magic and witchcraft? We know that traditional healthcare has existed since the beginning of our humanity everywhere. Yet as modern people, we know almost nothing, not even within all the anthropology, sociology, and medical investigation. What does this diversity mean? Every culture exists because of extensive prescribed behaviors, how you dress, what you say, what you do, your social interactions, your belief. This is how one culture or one village separated itself from another village or another culture. Yes, big religions can cross over, and yes, modern medicine crosses over. Some of the big traditional health systems crossed over, but most villages or cultures had their specific health system and pregnancy and birth and newborn practices. These skills are being lost very rapidly as the world modernizes. And remember, they all have the good, the bad, the ugly, and successful. How do you feel about one health system that said heart-shaped leaves treat the heart? Or how did the Chinese discover Yunnan Baiyao that stops bleeding? How did tribes in Zimbabwe discover the donkey placenta can stop bleeding? And how many skills do you think each traditional health system has around pregnancy and birth and the newborn? And what are the roles expected of the woman, the partner, the family? And how does all of this, the culture, the religion, the health systems, pregnancy and childbirth and newborn period, happen around things such as war or poverty, natural disasters? I want to give you two examples. Common Knowledge Trust had a gathering in Zimbabwe with a traditional and medical clinic in 1998. It was a gathering of midwives. Half of the 900 were nurse midwives because all nurses in Zimbabwe are trained to be midwives. And the other were from the TBA program, the Traditional Birth Attendant Program from the World Health Organization. We split up into groups. One group dealt with problems in pregnancy and birth. There were half midwives and half traditional birth attendants. The midwives led the conversation and said to the TBAs, what are the different 10 reasons that you should refer people to clinics? And the traditional birth attendants spouted those 10 things off in each of those categories. And the nurse midwife said, wonderful, got up and left. I stayed with the traditional birth attendants and said, what are the things that bother you? Of those 10 in pregnancy and those 10 in birth, what bother you? So what does bother you? And they said only 2 things. What do you think those 2 things were? I mentioned one of them in one of the introductions. And at a certain level, this becomes common sense. The 2 things. Number 1, baby can't get out. Because they know if they can't get a baby out, the baby will die and the mother will die in time. And the second is that the woman bleeds too much. They're not as worried about the fast bleeds. They're worried about the slow trickles. No traditional community understands dehydration or the collapse of the cardiovascular system or needing to hydrate at that level. How would they know that? Traditional communities don't know that women have a cervix. Many traditional communities don't connect intercourse with conception. Why should they? It takes months for the uterus to grow above the pubic bone. Traditional communities have always accepted babies are dying. And prior to antibiotics and immunizations, 20 to 30% of children around the world in all cultures died prior to the age of 5. Now let me tell you another example. I was in a remote conservative Hindu village in Pakistan. They had come over from India during the partition because they were the untouchable caste, and they thought they would achieve more equality there. It was a village without running water, without electricity. Birth was done in the village. And I asked the women in the day that I was there and sharing the skills of birthing better with them, how did your mother teach you to breathe in labor? Reasonable question. There was no answer. It's absolute dead silence. But I've learned to wait. And at some point, one woman said, my mother taught me to breathe slow and deep. To which immediately the response was, that's not what my mother told me. She told me to breathe fast and shallow. That's not what my mother told me. My mother told me to hold my breath when it was painful. That's not what my mother told me. My mother told me, don't make a noise, you'll embarrass yourself. That's not what my mother told me. My mother told me to scream all you want, it hurts. That's not what my mother told me. My mother told me to do X and it didn't work. That's not what my mother told me. My mother told me there's nothing you can do to prepare for birth. So nothing works. That's one village that has existed in the same place since partition and existed together as a village for hundreds and hundreds of generations in the past. Yet every single one of those women took the same 11 skill steps to make a roti or chapati. And this is why we want to introduce the concept. Now let's turn our attention to modern medicine. Very recently, modern medicine has silenced siloed. There used to be just general practitioners. And modern medicine is fairly standard worldwide. And yet it's only, 150 years old or 200 years old? And that's how fast our original, diversified, traditional health skills get lost. There are lots of reasons why modern medicine has moved throughout the world. What do you think some of those reasons have been? Write that down. And think about this for a minute. The benefit to many people moving into modern society is the ability to move away from their culture and their restrictions horizontally. Now, men and women can marry outside their group, where there are more equalities, or restrictions vertically, class restrictions, economic ability, just general equalities. And when people move from the strong prescriptions of their culture, they can then just have personal choice. And how does that impact pregnancy and childbirth and newborn period? And remember, all of this has the good, the bad, the ugly, and successful. Does modern medicine include opioids? Coca-Cola was originally made from cocaine. What about doctors who use vibrators to cure women's hysteria or lobotomies? In 2018, medical errors was the third most common cause of death in the United States. Does that make you feel that traditional health or natural health could never do that? Now let's take a look at natural health. It takes tiny bits from the vast amounts of traditional healthcare, and they totally just mix it up within modern culture. It's called fusion now, isn't it? It's not uncommon for you to go have barbecue ribs one night and Asian the next week, or Middle Eastern the next week. It's all blended. And healthcare is the same. It's all blended. Natural health and wellness are perhaps remnants of traditional healthcare. And there are people who blend their health care. They'd prefer to have a good lifestyle, but if they broke a bone, they'd go to a doctor. Or they may have a home birth, but they feel there's a problem. They'd transfer to the hospital. How old is natural health? Do we consider Chinese medicine, Western European herbalism, Ayurvedic, Greek, Roman medicines, are these natural health? Or as I said in the introduction, are they the precursor to modern health care? Should these systems replace modern medicine? And write down where they should, or should they integrate. In the 70s, they were using the word alternative medicine, and I was saying to people, no, don't use that word. Now it's called functional medicine or complementary health care. You don't want people to be in an oppositional mode, and that brings us back to the concept that we're trying to get you to promote to your clients. We cannot have low-risk and high-risk pregnant women separated from each other. We can't have hospital and home births separated from each other. We can't have doctor or midwifery care separated from each other. Because remember, there's the good, the bad, the ugly, and successful. There are cringeworthy things, and there are things that are just great. But does natural health include phrenology, or a rhino bone to increase male sexual powers, or tarot, or seances? The natural health often tries to find workarounds instead of using modern medicine. First one that I noticed was don't lie on your back and deliver that way because you're anti-gravity. So they sat women up in a semi-recumbent position without understanding that that fixes the sacrum, which makes it so much harder for a baby to push the sacrum out and back so that it can come around the corner of the pubic arch. Did anybody see that? Not in my lifetime. Natural birth movement didn't like inductions, a rupture of a membrane or a medical induction, so they suggested castor oil. It's still an induction. So what's happening? I don't know. So why am I asking these questions? We're no longer living in traditional cultures outside of modern stuff. So what does this old-time discussion have to do with the present or the concept? Well, in reality, there was traditional health care throughout the time humans have existed. And then there was medical care within 3 or 4 generations ago. The natural birth movement that formed wasn't happy with medical care and assumed that traditional care in pregnancy, childbirth, and the newborn was just simple, with no prescribed behaviors, no demands, and birth just happened prior to modern medicine easily, without a fuss. It's not that simple. It never has been. And for natural birth advocates, if you think the medical professions with its assessments, monitoring, and procedures are prescribed behaviors, you have not lived in a traditional culture where everything about your life is prescribed behaviors. Everything. You don't get a choice. You don't get to choose. You don't have informed consent. So where do we go from here? Birth will always exist. Are we serious when we believe that it's so normal, natural, and physiological that it's a no-brainer? That it's the only big thing in life, in all cultures throughout the world, that has no skills attached to it? We have more skills attached to making a container and learning how to carry water on our head. But are we serious that we believe that childbirth and pregnancy is just a no-brainer? Or do we begin to wake up to the fact that it is normal, natural, and physiological, just as being hungry is, or being horny? But do we treat hunger or having sex in such a glib manner? Do you have children? How much time have you spent taking things out of your child's mouth? Shouldn't it be just instinctive to humans to know what's good or bad for us to put in our mouth that could go down to our stomach? It's a lesson in no, it's not instinctive. Is it instinctive to be able to find spices in your neighborhood? Maybe you're gardening them, but did you have to learn what ones grow there? Do you have to learn when to pick them, how to use them, how to blend flavors in your mouth so that you can cook a good meal? Being hungry does not produce safety in our mouth or knowing how to cook. And yet it's natural, normal, and physiological. And there are a million cookbooks around having skills. What about having sex? Is having sex such a glib manner? Sex education, should we have it or should we ban it? And what is sex education? Are men learning how to please women or even read what a woman's body wants when he's touching her? Do women know that? How many of you have practiced tantric yoga or Taoist sexual yoga? We treat hunger and sex more importantly than we treat giving birth. Is it because we do those things more frequently? And here are other questions to ask. Is birth so dangerous that all the bells and whistles should be used as the norm? Or is it so safe that we should basically do nothing and assume that how it's unfolding is going to lead to good results, a woman who doesn't suffer, and good recovery? So we seem to be caught between do nothing and do everything. And that's the oppositional approach. And this is why we want to bring forward this concept. It doesn't have to be this way, because you're all forgetting that it's the 100% of pregnant women who have to do the activity of birthing their baby within whatever culture or health system is available to them, or they can access, or sometimes can choose. And since the 1950s, that oppositional approach has grown more and more and more. It's just gotten worse between modern health and natural birth. And I talked about both of those in the 3 health systems. Both of these systems are successful and not successful, but what does success mean? So that you have to compare success to the 3 global health goals. Success was never about having a natural birth that meant death or injury to the mother or child. It was never about pain-free labor. That was just some sort of where did that come from? And it has never been about having birth without medical care. And the assumption is with no care. Why are you doing the Webster technique on people? Why do you support optimal fetal positioning? Why do you like midwives who use the rebozo? And this is why the family's request to me to carry forward the concept in Birthing Better Skills was a task I was willing to take on, because we understood the global truth. 100% of pregnant women are going to give birth one way or another, and it's an activity each woman does by herself, and that every activity is done better when we have some level of self-learned skills. So the concept bridges all other issues. ICPA arose in the United States and is becoming international. I know it focuses on natural health and natural birth. And ICPA members are really what's called the second tier of birth workers, along with doulas or along with yoga teachers. You work with individual clients, and you may have some classes as well. You seek to have positive impact on pregnancy, birth, and recovery. And you probably work with many clients who are using blended healthcare. Common Knowledge Trust has always been global because of the truths around childbirth. We are adding the concept to this universal activity. And as I mentioned, this is what families ask me to carry forward, is the understanding that each of them will give birth because they're pregnant, and that each woman is doing the activity by herself. Everything else is variable because there is no way to know what your birth will be like. However, there is something you can do to prepare for birth that will guide you through the activity, and that is to self-learn skills. Remember, concept 1 took that sentence, there's no way to know what your birth can be like, to include there's nothing you can really do about it. And concept 2, which is the Lamaze and Bradley and Grantley Dick Reed skills-based concept, was that low-risk women who use breathing and relaxation and don't fear birth can achieve that natural birth, pain-free labor with no medical care. They never were focused on the 3 global health goals. Concept 3, which is the choice-based system, intentionally got rid of skills and focused on the low-risk women who know what kind of birth they want and to make a birth plan and just trust it and believe that because women have always birthed, we've always secretly known how to do it, and still to achieve that natural, undefined birth, pain-free labor with no medical care. And now included in this, more things like home birth, midwives, water birth, free birthing, being left alone to discover birth. And now what we're asking to bring forward is the concept that when you're pregnant, learn some birthing coaching skills and then use your skills as you do the activity of birthing your baby as birth unfolds. As modern humans, we have lost the majority of skills necessary to live life. We have also really lost the extensiveness of wellness systems. For example, if you choose not to immunize your child against whooping cough, do you have the skills to take care of your child? In this debate about COVID, we know that COVID killed elderly people primarily and those with pre-existing conditions. What percent of Americans or worldwide have pre-existing conditions? But what if COVID had killed those under 15? Do you think people's responses would have been different? I know that when I grew up in the polio epidemic, that no parent would want their child to get polio with the hopes of being better afterwards, to develop natural immunity, because we knew that between the dying of polio were lots of other problems besides wellness and greater strength. We have to clearly look at the 3 global childbirth goals and work around them primarily. Birth is still going to happen. Do you really think that modern women and men want to go back to traditional birth? And how do we separate this one-off and frequent, can't be replayed, life-transforming experience from the rest of modern living? We can't. Traditional birth is not separated from traditional living. Once we stop living traditionally, we are in the modern world. We can blend these systems as the mission statement from Common Knowledge Trust is. But when people believe that doing without medical care is the same as having traditional healthcare skills, that's not reasonable thinking. I carried both the concept and the skills in my head for 25 years before we could even get our first resource out. And I've always known that if technology could catch up with us, so we're working now on creating an app for all of our courses that can be translated into multiple language, because we know the concept has no ideology other than common sense. When you're pregnant, learn skills to do the activity of birthing your baby. You can repeat the concept of today. Women know what they want in their birth. They should make a birth plan. They should be involved in informed consent. They should be able to choose where they birth and with whom to birth. You know that litany. It comes right off your tongue easily. We want you to learn how to say the concept as easily, because 100% of pregnant women will give birth. And here's our choice, and it's simple. Either we evaluate giving birth as life's premium activity and not just something that happens, or we continue to treat it as there's no way to know what your birth's going to be like, and therefore there's nothing really you can do about it. Part of that is just saying, just trust ourselves that we can cope. Is that better than having skills to be able to cope? We can't trust that a mother or baby will live or have problems, but skilled families who work through this activity still feel more empowered even when tragedies occur. We can just trust that we'll recover from birth, or we can use skills to prepare our body so that it's more likely we can. And we can use those skills to reduce the trauma and tragedy from suffering and or from body damage to ourselves and our baby caused by birth. It's our choice. Common Knowledge Trust hopes that ICPA will be the messenger for this new concept and work with me in a 2-year pilot project.